Hi, I am Dr. Kristen Leash, for those of you who don't know me, co-founder and co-CEO at Title Equality. And today I'm excited to be bringing this micro-learning session to you on how to de-bias your people practices one question at a time. So let me start with a story. There's a sales professional, a woman. She noticed that there was an opportunity for a promotion in her business, a new position that had opened up that was more senior than the one she occupied. And she looked at the requirements and she thought, you know what, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to apply for this role. So she put together her promotion application, and she sat an interview, and she sat another interview, and in the end, she didn't get the role. She was told, we love the work that you're doing here and you're doing a fantastic job in your role, but, you don't have enough experience leading a team, and we're not sure you have the leadership strengths that we need to bring you forward into this higher position. She went away and, she's disappointed, and she thought about this, and she thought about the feedback that she got from the decision makers, and it just did not sit right with her. And so one day she was informally having a conversation with a colleague and friend who was also on that decision making table. And she said, can you level with me? I really want to know, is there anything, that I could have done, anything that I didn't hear back from you all that impacted the decision? And her friend said, okay, off the record, just want you to know that it came up, that your hair is a little too long. Makes you look young. It makes you look like you can't be a leader. And frankly, it's a little unprofessional. Now, she was floored. I mean, when I heard it, I was a little bit floored, although not entirely, because what I know is the fact is that bias and inequality, they exist in our society. Prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes. And because they live in our society, they live in our organizations. The doors to our businesses are permeable to the same type of bias that we see in the world. And the other fact is that if decisions are being made inside your organization that are a reflection of bias that lives in the world, then the people in your organization can't reach their full potential. But that also means neither can your organization. So the question that a lot of organizations grapple with is, should we try to de-bias the people making these sorts of decisions? Or is there some way we can de-bias the organization? Now, for those of you who are familiar with title equality and our methodologies, you'll know that we opt for the latter, that we learn from the research that is out there in the world that shows that the ripest fruit for equitable change is in the systems and processes and products that our organizations produce and act inside every day. And those methodologies show up in our WAVE strategic design process. And for many of you who are listening today who are familiar with the equity sequence, that methodology is underpinned there as well, where we really try and look under the hood of an organization's systems and processes and find how bias has been baked into them and then uproot it. And these methodologies are underpinned on a real belief that your people, their experiences, their perspectives, these hold the key to unlocking the equitable and inclusive potential of not only your processes and products and systems, but of your organization writ large. And we believe that you can tap into that potential if you and your organization are curious and courageous enough to ask the sorts of questions that really elicit stories and anecdotes and perspectives about how inequality shows up in your organization, how it's experienced and how it's expressed. But frankly, that kind of courage and curiosity is a bit more rare than you might expect. So I want you to think, when was the last time, as an organization or as an individual, you asked your people to tell you about their experiences of inequality, of bias, or of discrimination, and asked it in a way that really allowed them to be candid with you, and also asked it in a way that wasn't pro forma, framed inside constraints. I'm going to give you an example of an organization that that allowed title equality to come in and ask these sorts of questions of their people. It was a professional services firm, and for a long time, they really struggled to advance women to partnership roles from associate roles. You know, they thought that the problem existed with the usual suspects. The billable hour was really rough on women, or women who wanted to have families were struggling with the constraints of the business and wanted more flexible working arrangements. And so when we sat with the partners of this firm, they said, we really don't think we can change any of those things, and we're pretty sure that's the problem. So, don't know that we're going to come up with much better here if we talk to these female associates. But they allowed us to go in, and we asked some really open-ended questions of the women who worked in this firm. And so what we learned when we listened to them, when we asked them about their experiences in the business and what obstacles they faced when it came to advancement, we heard a couple of interesting things. Number one, we heard, no, the billable hour isn't the problem. In fact, we're probably billing more hours than our male colleagues, although they didn't know for sure, but they were really, they were working really hard, and that wasn't their problem. What they were saying was that despite all of that work, when it came to developing close face-to-face relationships with the clients on whose files they were working, those informal opportunities to build business, the opportunity to go to a hockey game with the client or go for a round of golf, those opportunities were being made available in a really ad hoc way. A partner might walk into the floor and tap the nearest male associate on the shoulder and say, hey, you want to come to the game tomorrow night with a client? And then that associate got the critical face time with the client that's required to build a portfolio that makes you an attractive applicant for partner. And the women just weren't getting those opportunities in the same way as their male colleagues. Now, that was an interesting perspective that the business had never seen before. And when they heard it and when they saw it, they realized that they had an opportunity to very simply tweak one of their processes to make these opportunities more equitable. So what happened next? They decided, okay, we're going to inject a process here. Anytime a partner in the firm wants to go to marketing and ask for, dinner reservations or hockey tickets or for a tea time to be booked, marketing brings up to that partner a spreadsheet that just shows which associates are billing the most hours on this file. So the partner can then look at the name at the top of the list, arguably the person who has earned the right to have this face time, and they can ask them first. So it was an equity measure that was injected into the process that took essentially the thinking or lack of thinking out of who was getting those important opportunities. And you might notice too that in this intervention, this equitable intervention, creating more equality, really is a rising tide that lifts all boats. It means that whoever is billing the most hours on that client file is the first to get asked to go to these informal business development and client relationship opportunities. Now, another example of an organization that asked their people about the barriers that they were facing to advancement or the inequities that they were facing was a tech company. And they were really wanting to look at how they could make the promotions process more equitable. They'd heard from many people, this doesn't seem fair, but there really wasn't a sense for where the lack of equity lived inside the process. And so we brought, in this case, the equity sequence questions to bear in a workshop with a cross-functional group of people from the organization who'd all had some degree of touch on the promotions process. And we heard a couple of really interesting things about the barriers there. And I'm going to point out afterwards how we never would have known these things if we'd taken an existing lens where we have preconceived notions about how inequity is experienced and expressed. So the first thing we learned was that employees in satellite offices seemed far less likely to achieve their promotion than folks in the head office. That, according to the folks in the room, seemed to be because those on the decision-making table were exclusively from head office. And so when an application came up for promotion and the applicant was in head office, they had a much greater chance of those one-on-one face-to-face interactions with decision makers compared with those who were in satellite offices who really only had face-to-face and meetings that occurred over Zoom, but they didn't have that informal relationship with decision makers. Another inequity that was revealed was how it made a difference whether an individual's manager had a good relationship with them and had the time to coach them, bring them insights when they were putting together their application for promotion. And that coaching, those informal insights, and even for their manager to have the time to provide them with that, gave those folks an upper hand when it came to putting together their bid for promotion. So these insights bring the opportunity to tweak processes and inject equity mechanisms. In the first case, this organization decided it could be a really great idea to put some decision makers on that voting panel who represented those satellite offices so that there is someone in the room who's likely to have had face-to-face interaction or more consistent interaction with an applicant from one of those offices. Secondly, they decided, you know what? If some people are getting an upper hand because they've got a good relationship with their manager and their manager seems to have the time to be able to coach them in how to put together a good bid for promotion, then why don't we make that kind of insight and coaching available to everyone across the board? They decided we can put this resource online and put all of those insights and coaching into this resource so that whether or not you've got a good relationship with your manager, whether or not they've got enough time on their plate to give you that coaching, that you've got access to that critical information that you can use to put together a successful package. What I want this example to point out to you is that inequality can be experienced and expressed in really some surprising ways. And what I mean is when we think about inequity and inequality, we very rightly often think about how it's experienced by underrepresented and marginalized groups, women, people of color, folks from the LGBTQ community, newcomers, and so on. And we think about those identities in particular and how those identities might shape folks' experiences. But inequity doesn't just show up in those ways. And when we bring a prescriptive lens, when we bring preconceived notions about how inequity and inequality can be experienced, it prevents us from really opening up the scope of possibility for how we might make equitable change for all. And so the insights that I've talked about today really have come from organizations and processes that ask very open ended questions, absolutely driven by an authentic curiosity to learn from the wisdom of the people in an organization. So, what I want you to leave you with today is just really understanding in a foundational way bias and inequality exist in our organizations and the people processes here. Whether we work for an organization that has a really amazing cause and is filled with amazing people, we are not immune to the effects of bias in our organizations. And so it's just there. But also know that and be inspired by the fact that your people inside your organization, they know how that bias shows up. They know how they experience discrimination and inequity. There is a lot of wisdom that lives in your people. And also know that when you get curious and courageous enough to ask questions about how your people experience bias and how it's expressed through your systems, you are then empowered to uproot that bias. You're getting at the root cause of the inequity that lives in your organization. And as you do that, one question and one decision at a time, you are creating a place where people can have an equal opportunity to succeed and reach that full potential. Now, some of you are already familiar with the equity sequence questions, and in both of the examples I provided you with, the equity sequence was core to finding these insights. But maybe you need some help, and maybe you've never heard of the equity sequence before, but you can find the equity sequence either by just Googling those words or by emailing us at hello@titleequality.com. But if you'd like more help, if you'd like some coaching, you can reach out anytime to us at Title Equality. You can find me, Kristen, at titleequality.com, and we're here to support you. Finally, I just want to leave you again with an uplifting thought, and that's that bias and inequality and solving these problems, they're not intractable. And that in fact, solving these problems can be a collaborative and uplifting process. It can be efficient, it can be effective when you learn to ask the right questions. Finally, I hope you found some insight and inspiration from this micro learning session. I just hope that together we are all working towards creating a world where equality is the new status quo and everyone can achieve their full potential.